Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm here to bring you another science fiction fantasy review wrap up, and today I'm talking about new releases, review copies, and some backlist books that I stumbled across on my own. And I'm always saying this, but I'm always looking for something new to read, something unique and fresh that I haven't seen before. And so my journey continues on with some more books that I feel are just a little bit different, a little bit unique, a little bit underhyped, and hopefully some that you will enjoy as well. All that being said, let's get started. First up, we have Up Against It by Laura J. Mixon, and this is a book that I received from Tor Books. It's part of their new Tor Essentials line, which I've been loving. Essentially, they are reprinting a lot of classics or more underhyped books that are getting now a new life. And this is great because this is a book that I had not heard of before, and I don't think honestly I would have ever read it had I not had the opportunity to check it out through Tor Books. And this story is set in a future. We follow a woman who is working on this colony planet where there is some kind of incident that happens and it turns out to be sabotage, and so all of the political things ensue from there. Now this book, if you can't see, is blurbed by the duo James S.A. Corey, the co-authors of my favorite, or one of my favorite space operas, The Expanse, and so I definitely understand why they did that, because while I don't want to claim that this book is exactly like The Expanse, and quite honestly it's not quite to the level of The Expanse. I love The Expanse, I like this one, but it definitely had similar vibes and setup. So again, it's set in a near future, or near-ish future. It's not so far-flung that we don't recognize the world. It's very character focused and has a lot of political maneuvering with kind of who to trust. You get to see the different interactions, the civil unrest. And I think if you really like things dealing with the belt in the Expanse series, you'll really connect with this one as well. It was really easy to get through, very easy to read. And it's, again, just a book that's so underhyped. I think it came out in like the early 2000s, and I don't know, no one else is ever talking about this book online, or at least not before this got re-released, so I'm really excited that I got a chance to check it out for myself. Next up, we have the Moonday Letters, which is a translated book that I received for review from Titan Books, and this is a piece of soft science fiction. Essentially, we are following the story from a woman who is married to a non-binary spouse, and that person's soul, their name is, disappears right at the beginning of the story, and so it's partially a mystery of them trying to track down where that person is, and then it's also a bit of a love letter. It really is a story that explores their marriage and relationship as the years have gone by, and I really did enjoy those elements. I am someone who typically prefers hard science fiction, and I typically don't love epistolary novels, which this is. This is told through letters, primarily letters that she is writing to her spouse soul, and so it's not the kind of book that normally works really well for me, but I picked up this one or requested for review specifically because I thought it was going to be a little bit unique, a little bit special, and it definitely was. While I don't love relationship talk normally in my books, I do appreciate good representation of healthy, happy, or just realistic marriages or partnerships, and I really got that here. As I mentioned, this is definitely soft in terms of sciences, so if you are someone who doesn't read a lot of science fiction but are watching this video anyway, this is a good one to get into because, again, it's much more about the characters and their relationships rather than the details of this far-flung future and how it all fits together. And again, the far-flung future isn't actually that far away, so the story makes sense. The technology doesn't get in the way. There isn't a lot of gobbledygook when it comes to like explaining detailed physics concepts, nothing like that. This is definitely a slower, character-driven book, so if you enjoy something that's a little bit more slow burning and a little bit more quiet and meandering, this is one I think you will really enjoy. I like this book, but again, I think that if you love those elements, you will love this book even more than I did. Next up, we have Version Zero by Daniel Yoon, and this is a book that is set in supposedly the kind of near future or the present day, where we follow a young man of El Salvian descent, where he is working for this company that's called Ren, which is basically Facebook. Essentially, they're this online community where they encourage people to come online, share their lives, give away all of their personal information for free, in which case the company turns around and sells it off to different marketing companies in order to create targeted marketing ads. And this book, I gotta say, was highly topical. I love the themes that it plays around with surrounding privacy and social media sharing and data mining and all these super topical things. It also points fun at different online platforms like Reddit, and I just really enjoyed the setup. There are some really witty banter and lines, especially in the beginning and setup of the story, and it also, as I mentioned, kind of has this unique, diverse element where you really get to discuss some of the difficulties or challenges of being someone who has parents that are of a different background and are immigrants to the country. And so I think that's going to be really relatable to anyone who shares that experience. And yeah, I love the story at the beginning, but I'll be honest, this book had so much potential and it really lost steam and kind of missed the mark. So it had this amazing setup where basically there's this conspiracy, you realize there's this evil corporation and things are happening. And then the story just got really messy, really over the top. And despite being a reasonably short book, it just was too long and too messy and kind of fell apart for me. So I'll be honest, I love the beginning. I kind of want to recommend it just to read like the first couple chapters, and then if it loses steam, just put it down. But it was a lot of fun until the point that it just got kind of weird and just kind of lost its way. So sort of recommend this book. You figure it out. Next up, we have The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and this is a classic dystopian novel that is set in a future where there is this nation where human, or rather women's rights have been pulled back. You have a society that is struggling with fertility, and because of this, they are using the fertile women of this land and using them as objects or property and being used to basically birth the children of the women in higher up positions. And so within the society, we follow a young woman who is known of Fred. She remembers life before, but of course is now in this world. I think everyone kind of knows this one. And the reason I picked up this book is, well, first off, I'm Canadian, so it's basically a requirement to constantly be reading Margaret Atwood. I kid, but kind of not. And so I have actually read this book before. I don't always talk about rereads, but the last time I read this was in high school, well before I had a booktube channel. So I decided to pick up this book again. I will be honest, because of current events, everyone is referencing this online, saying that we are currently experiencing that. And I really did want to reflect back on what the book was in order to kind of, process how the current state of things does or does not relate to it. So all that being said, I will say that this book is really well written. I think Margaret Atwood is an amazing storyteller, and more so, she is amazing at predicting and commenting on things that are possible. And so I really like the fact that she's always said that with her work, that she doesn't write about galaxies far, far away. She purposely writes about things that are based in things that already exist or could exist in one facet or another. And so she did a lot of research when she was doing this, looking at different practices all throughout the world. And this book is just really, really chilling. I'll admit this was a really tough book to read. Even though it was a reread for me, I just found the subject matter to be really grim and dark and depressing, and you definitely have to be in the right mood for it. And so I do think that reading this one as an adult, I definitely got a lot more out of it. The first time around, I liked this book, but it definitely hit me home on a harder level this time around. And I think that if you haven't read it, I do recommend it. It's a book that I would classify as science fiction dystopian, so I'm putting in this video, but really, even if you're a horror reader sticking around and watching this video, I also think that it's a kind of horror in its own right. So I do think that if you like books that are horrifying in more of a literary way, and again plays off of real life horror, this book is incredibly powerful. Again, it's a book I read before, so the fact that even on a reread it could hit me in such an emotional way, as someone who honestly isn't normally an emotional reader, really says a lot. Can you tell I really love Margaret Atwood? I think she is brilliant, and this book, which is so popular, is absolutely worth the hype and the praise, and is really one that I think everyone should read at one point in their lifetime. If that time is now, great. If you need to wait a little bit, I understand that too. It's a heavy read, so go into it when you're in the right mental space for it. Then I want to talk about Memories Legion by James S.A. Corey, and this is a collection of novellas that I read a little ways back and never actually talked about. Essentially, these are novellas that are set between the major Expanse books in the series, and I did want to go back and read them all, especially because there was a final story that was set after the last book. I'm going to keep this, of course, all spoiler free, but what I will say is that if you are a major Expanse fan, you may want to check out these stories, because honestly I just had to check them out for myself. Some of them will give you a little bit more insight into some of the main characters, which were ones I liked. But I will say with the collection, my problem with these kind of story collections is that you always have it where they can't really be that important to the plot, because they are considered to be extensions of it. So with the Expanse series, you can read all 9 books and get the complete story without reading these novellas. And because of that, it means that the novellas can't have any real consequences. No one is going to die. There is no effect on the major story points. And so for me, I really struggle with that. And the reason I want to talk about that is because I also read the Jade City or Bone Saga novella, which is, I believe, The Jade City of Janloon. And so that's another one by Fonda where it's a fantasy book, but essentially it's set in the same world, but we follow secondary characters, and I liked it, but I don't like books where there's no purpose to the book itself. I'm really big and focused on narrative and story and plotting. And my problem always with these extra books is that they do feel like filler. They feel like something that's a little bit of a cash grab. And they always leave me really unsatisfied because the stories just really fade away because, again, there's no consequences. They don't add enough to the story for me. But I feel like this is an unpopular opinion. But I wanted to talk about it online to find out if anyone else agrees. Do you read those like little novellas and short stories that go along with these stories that you're normally reading, those longer series, or do you skip over them? Because I'm kind of a mixed mind. When I really love a series, I do want to kind of experience everything I can about it, but I've been really underwhelmed by a few of these novellas I've been picking up recently, and I think I would have almost rather have just focused on the main novels, and I don't know if it was worth my time to go and like read these extra novellas. Let me know what you think. Now to talk about more fantasy, we have The Pariah by Anthony Ryan, which is the first book that came out last year, as well as this new release of The Martyr, also of course by Anthony Ryan. These are books I received for review from Orbit. I'm going to talk only plot points about the first book, so I'm not spoiling anything. The basic setup is that we follow a man who is working or living with a group of outlaws. However, something happens to one of them and it sets him on a revenge plot. So I will say this is a super classic fantasy narrative, and it's done well, but it's one I have read many times before, and there are novels that I prefer over this one. I will say though that the character development is very strong, the prose is excellent in this book, and the second, everything I'm talking about for this book applies to the second as well. It's a very consistent series, and I think if you like that first person narration where it's like someone telling a tale and it's very intimate and close, this is one that will really appeal to those of you that love those elements. I like this one. I really don't have any complaints about it, but you can probably tell from the way I'm describing this one that it's not a favorite of mine. I liked it, but it's just not one that really I fell in love with. And again, I'm always looking for something a little bit different, a little bit unique. This one was just oh so standard, and I felt like it checked all the boxes. It did everything really well, but it didn't give me an experience I haven't experienced in the past. So again, if you're someone who just loves fantasy, loves to get as much of it as you can, and you enjoy that classic narrative style, then I do think that you might really enjoy this one even more than I did. Finally, I want to talk about Chasing Graves by Ben Galley, and this is one I received or requested for review from the author because I really wanted to check this out. This is the first book in what I believe is a trilogy. It's set in the secondary world where when people die in certain circumstances, and there's rules to this, their souls can be tethered and basically they can be turned into slaves that don't get to move on to the next world. And of course, we follow a few different perspectives, including someone who is in that situation. And oh my goodness, I love this book. So this is a perfect book to contrast with the last book because while the other book was oh so classic, this one was oh so unique. It felt fresh, it felt different, and it just, again, is a book I've never quite read before. Certainly it pulls from other elements. It's not something that's completely out of the box, but it certainly is different than the very standard classic fantasy, and I really liked it. You could call it, it has almost like a bit of an urban fantasy feel, but not the romance, just like that very modern kind of city setting. And this book is so gritty and grim, and I loved it. There's some great banter between the characters. There's some really witty and distinct narrative. There's basically like two main perspectives that we have, and each one has a really strong voice. So if you can't tell, I really enjoyed this one. This is what I'm looking for when I'm looking for like unique stories. I had a feeling that this one would be right up my alley, and I'm so pleased that it definitely lived up to that expectation. And yeah, I had a lot of fun with this. So again, if you're looking for something different, if you like fantasy, or even if you don't read a lot of fantasy, or just again looking for something that's accessible but unique, this is a great one to check out. And yes, technically it has some like horror elements, but it's not scary at all if you're wondering. It was just a lot of fun. Very gritty, very grim, and yeah, everything I kind of was looking for in a book. So definitely recommend this one. So that's it for this video here. I would love to hear of the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out? And I just, yeah, love to hear your feedback. Are you someone who is always looking for a really unique book? Or do you really just enjoy books that lean into those tropes and kind of give you the same story that you've read before? But there is something comforting about that. So I'd love to hear opinions. And specifically, I want to know tie-in novellas and short stories for the book series that you love. Do you love them or hate them? I would love to hear opinions down below. I just wish they added more to the universe, and I know they add a little bit more, but I find it so unsatisfying. It's like going to a restaurant and only having like one appetizer, like one little like shrimp or something. It's just I don't know, I'd rather have a whole meal or nothing at all, if I'm honest. So that's honestly why I do lean towards full-length novels more than kind of shorter fiction in general. Anyway, if you're new to my channel and are still around, thank you so much. You can consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, thrillers, science fiction, and fantasy and true crime. And if you want to help me out, you can give this video a thumbs up, share it around online. You can drop a comment, even if just a little emoji like, I don't know, a ghost or a spaceship. I don't know. I'm scratching for ideas here. If you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.